What is up, everybody? Welcome back here to the Dev Royale YouTube channel. We're back with a top 25, working our way down the top 10. We are back finally with Alabama. Talking to Alabama Crimson Tide. They have a new head coach. They have new pieces all over the transfer portal. They got these incoming freshmen, a very, very talented freshman class. We're going to be talking about all that. We're going to be getting into notable losses, recruits. What does Kalen DeBoer look like? New head coach. Nick Saban is out. What is DeBoer going to do with that team? What is Womack is going to do with their defense on the other side, kind of switching up a scheme, which is kind of interesting for an Alabama team. But first, let's kind of talk about Nick Saban's swan song, how they finished last year. Overall, they were a very, very good team. 12-2. They won the SEC title game, beat the crap out of Georgia. That game was not as close as it was when you were watching it there. Milroe really turned it on, right? After getting, I don't know, I don't want to say benched, but there was some weird things happening out there at Alabama at the beginning of the year against South Florida. He comes back, they beat that Ole Miss team, and it really kind of just propelled them forward, right? And they were overtime game away from probably winning the national title. Alabama, if they would have beat Michigan, probably would have beat Washington, and it'd been it's just been a weird outcome. But that didn't happen. They lost to Michigan in overtime, and then Nick Saban retired. That's really what we got to get into now, because this is an entirely different team now. And when you look at it from an offensive perspective, it's hard to go over what they did last year because DeBoer's there now. But just for, what was some strengths of theirs and some weaknesses? Rushing, they really targeted that rushing. Rushes per game, they were 16th in the nation. Rush play percentage 14. So really on the ground is where you saw that. But a big part of that was Jalen Milroe. When you watch Jalen Milroe play, obviously he definitely has those 531 yards, 12 touchdowns. He had 161 attempts last year. That's a big part of that offense. It's going to continue being a big part of that offense with Kalen DeBoer and his history with quarterbacks actually leading the team in rushes and rushing yards. So we're going to see that. So that's just something I wanted to highlight. From a passing percentage, it was a little rough. Passing play percentage, they were 120th. They just didn't throw the ball that much. Yards per pass, they were 6th, though. So when they did, they definitely were efficient with it. But part of the problem was they just didn't throw that much. So the metrics kind of skewed a little bit. But let's talk about this team this year. Let's talk about the offensive line, the weapons that they have lost. What is your biggest takeaway, Christian, from this team?
Oh, there's a lot. But the first thing, we were talking pre-show, and I was going through the offensive line just as like a double check, and I was like, that guy's a stud, that guy's a stud, and that guy's a stud. So they're returning one of the better offensive lines in the country, and I think that that's a really important piece to looking at what this offense can be, because Jalen Milroe, for all of his strengths last year, the sacks were really bad, and he holds onto the ball a really long time, and they kind of encourage that because what he can do with his legs. But I do think that having a strong offensive line in front of him is a very important piece of his success. Now, you talked about last year with his benching. I think there was some stuff going on with Tommy Rees. There's a big conspiracy theory that Rees didn't want to play Milroe. So Saban said, fine, we won't. Let's see what happens. And then we saw how bad it got without him. And then he really came on down the stretch. When you put these pieces around him as well, like bringing in Jeremy Bernard is huge, because one of the most underrated players on that Washington team last year, if only because he was sitting behind, a ton of really good wide receivers. Kobe Prentice, Kendrick Law, like Ryan Williams is an incoming freshman. This offense is loaded. I haven't even talked about the running backs. I love Jam Miller. I have loved Jam Miller since he was a recruit. And him and Justice Haynes are probably going to lead this backfield. But also you look down the rest of the depth chart, and it's like they're loving Richard Young. They think that he can be an impact player. Daniel Hill's still there. I love Kevin Riley as well. There must be something about Alabama running backs. So to me, this offense has every opportunity to be more efficient than it was last year, especially because I think there's a new feel to what this offense will be with the scheme change. It's going to take some development from Milroe, but I think they can do it, because it's tough to be bad with this much talent.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the QB sack percentage, because last year he was sacked at a 13.75% rate. That's 132nd in college football. That's not, they allowed too many sacks last year. Now, I don't know how much of that was the offensive line and Milroe kind of doing what he did in the back, but it was a combination that just, that's the big part that just didn't fit this scheme very well. And that's really what they got to work on there. I do think they're going to use more design runs this year, though. I really do think that. And look at what they did with Michael Penix Jr. Turn him into a first-round draft pick. And, yes, he lost Ryan Grubb, who went to the Seattle Seahawks as offensive coordinator, but Nick Sheridan, people forget that he called plays at Indiana. He tries going to adjust that. He did those things and was the tight end coach out there at Washington. So they do have that background there. And to your point about that running back room, I really think all 5 of those guys could be starters elsewhere. Like they go somewhere else, boom. They're and it really, I don't think it matters if it was G5, Power 5, or what a Power 4, however you want to say it now. Like they could play. Like these guys are definitely pieces there. And I think Jam is really underrated. I think Jam Miller is a little bit underrated than people are giving credit for. Now, as far as what they've lost, yes, they lost a lot. Like any of these teams at the top are going to lose a lot of guys. That's just a reality. Jace McClellan is a guy that we've liked. I thought he was a very, very solid piece for them last year. 180 attempts, 890 yards, 8 touchdowns, making a little wave out there in Atlanta. I hope it's not done yet, as I've kind of dived into him. Isaiah Bond, obviously a big loss going to Texas. Jermaine Burton playing well for Cincinnati right now. Malik Benson over at Florida State. Terrence Ferguson, J.C. Latham, and Amari Nickback, who went also to Texas as well. What is your big takeaway from these losses?
I mean, losing Isaiah Bond is huge. I talked about the talent in that wide receiver room, but if you had Isaiah Bond returning, it would be a whole different ball game. This would be a legitimate national title contender. I don't think that they're not one necessarily, but I think with Isaiah Bond, I could firmly say that they are. Even if they get iffy quarterback play, Bond's just a game-changing type of wide receiver. So I think that's the biggest loss, especially from a lot of J.C. Latham. I love that kid, but naturally he declared for the NFL draft because he is a top 10 draft pick. So the rest of the guys, I think that the replacements are all there. I don't think they're going to feel this the way a lot of programs do because it's Alabama. They've recruited so well. All of these guys that are playing this year have been with the team for quite a while too. It's not like they're just plugging in incoming freshmen or a ton of transfers or anything like that. Losing Bond sucks, but also I think that it's okay. It'll be okay.
It's all right. I mean, I like Bond, 668 yards, 4 touchdowns last year, and I think he's going to be great for Texas. However, they got some dudes, Jeremy Bernard, Ryan Williams, pretty talented freshman coming in. Like these guys are going to be able to kind of make up for that. And I think the scheme makes up for that too. I think the scheme last year, in the last few years under Alabama, it's really needed that big play wide receiver that they haven't really had, right? They missed on Ajayi Hall. They missed on some of those guys. Their injuries have definitely taken a toll there. And I think the scheme that we're now going to see with DeBoer is going to change that. I don't think you need like that one guy. I think these guys are going to be evenly matched in terms of that wide receiver room. They're going to disperse targets really well. And I think that's going to help out this offense a lot, where it's not one dimensional, one guy getting those targets there. From a recruiting standpoint, well, he kept the number 2 overall class. And I think with DeBoer, there was a lot of question marks coming in about the recruiting side. But, I think that we don't give DeBoer enough credit. He took Washington to a national championship game where they were in it with Michigan. I mean, a couple plays here or there, they could have been the champions there. He can recruit. He knows what he's doing. And you know what? Playmakers want to play for him. And I think that's why Ryan Williams stayed, obviously reclassified into this class here. 5-star kid. He's absolutely phenomenal. He's one of my favorite players watched on tape. This kid is just special out there. Obviously, they lost Julian Sand to Ohio State, but they made up for that. When you're looking at that, Caleb Odom, tight end, 4-star kid, very good. Daniel Hill, Kevin Riley, like you talked about. Amari Jefferson doesn't get the buzz out there that some of like Ryan Williams, these guys, but he was an athlete coming in, says he's probably going to play wide receiver. Jameer Grizzly, Rico Scott. If you just look at the wide receivers, they attacked those wide receivers, and they went after some interior offensive linemen, but they definitely addressed some stuff on the offensive side.
They sure did, and there's a reason that playmakers want to play here. And obviously that's been a thing for Alabama for a while. But like you mentioned, Kalen DeBoer has put a ton of dudes in the NFL already, and so there's still that draw despite losing Nick Saban. I already mentioned it, but Kevin Riley, man, is that kid talented. I know that he's probably not getting as much hype because he's going to an Alabama room that's loaded, and that's how it tends to go. But 2 or 3 years down the road, I mean, Kevin Riley could be he's my RB2 in this class right now. And there are times where I'm like, man, I might be low on him. I think he's a complete stud. And then Ryan Williams, you mentioned it, but talk about a deep threat playmaking type of wide receiver. Obviously, he'll have to put on a little bit of weight, just a little bit, not too much. We want him to stay super fast, but this class is just loaded with dudes. It's not like a traditional Alabama class where you see 5-star after 5-star after 5-star, but it's still a really good class.
Well, we haven't got the defense yet. Just wait till we get the defense, and we'll see
That's
some
right.
of those guys on that side. But a couple of notes: Amari Johnson last year, 72 catches, 1,300 yards, 17 touchdowns. Like he looked really phenomenal. And he's out of Tennessee, very good prospect there. And if you haven't watched Daniel Hill play, I know if you're an Alabama fan, you watched him play. That dude's a load, like 5'11", 240, playing a little bit just like Wildcat. Things that he did last year was a lot of fun on tape. And him and Riley are very 1-2 good punches. Like if you look at that Thunder and Lightning, if they stay there, if you're looking at these guys staying there, because we've seen people transfer, the transport, everything there, they are a very, very solid group there. Now, what DeBoer I thought did probably the best was the transfers he brought in. Now, I put Caden Proctor. I put him on here, but just to like,
Doesn't
just
count.
for fun. As just like a caveat. Yeah, he bounced. He went back and forth, but he's back and he's a stud. He got some NIL money there. Austin Mack is another quarterback. If Alabama didn't know about this kid, he from Washington, he was a very, very sought after recruit. 6'6", 225. I really think he's the next in line out there for them. Jeremy Bernard as well. And then they just really address kind of need. Josh Kravis as well. He's an interesting one from Washington. I've actually watched him play from the Devy side of things. He's a fun depth piece there. And then they got their kicker, Graham Nicholson from Maryland.
Yeah, Parker Brailsford is one of the best players on this list too. That kid, just an absolute stud last year. I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's a very big upgrade to this offensive line, to be completely honest, which is crazy coming from out west and coming to Alabama and being an upgrade on the offensive line is not traditionally how it goes. But that he has a case to be the best interior offensive lineman. If he should declare, he's still, I believe, he's a redshirt sophomore designation. So he could be there for a couple of years and really kind of hold this offensive line together. So hopefully, he has a good enough year that he should declare, because that means that Alabama was pretty good. So,
Yeah.
but overall, just a great transfer class as usual.
Yeah, Washington had a number one rated offensive line last year. There's a reason why he came over to Alabama. That's a great grab there. Now, as far as the impact players, I mean, this starts with Jalen Monroe and ends with Jalen Monroe. What can he be? Will he assert himself as being a first-round draft pick? That 2025 quarterback class is wide open, baby. And if he just gets a little bit better as a passer, I think you saw it in the spring game. He had those great 3 or 4 throws where you're like, damn, Jalen Monroe is special. And then he had 10 throws. You're like, where were you going, Jalen? Like, where were you looking at that? And I think that's just the case with him. If he can be more consistent, I think that there's a possibility that he leads this team in rushing as well, or gets close to it, as long as he stays healthy. Really comes down to that. Obviously, they have great players. Obviously, we could have listed probably 10 players on this list. But to me, it comes down to Jalen Monroe.
Yeah, 100%. And I've talked about it for a while, but this is a kid that I'm betting on, just from the mental makeup. Every time you watch that kid in an interview, you say,
Mm-hmm.
this kid's going to make it somehow. Like, even if it's pretty rough, like the mechanics right now, they're not great. He's worked on that already. We saw that in the spring game. So, like, he has a commitment to being great. And I kind of think that that's going to show this year. I know there's a little bit of buzz out there that, like, there's a chance that he loses the job. I just don't see that
No.
happening. You don't take a playmaker like him off the field in favor of guys that they might be able to deliver a safe offense. And maybe with this defense, it makes a little bit of sense. But to me, he's going to take that next step. And I think that you're right. Their success does lie on his shoulders. For better or for worse, I think it's going to be for better. So he's definitely the most impact player here.
I kind of want him to get drafted in the first round just to tell off Bill O'Brien for saying he was not a quarterback, right? Like
Yeah.
I really want that to happen, because Bill O'Brien's an asshole. Sorry if you're like
Yeah.
Bill O'Brien out there, Alabama fans, but he drove me nuts. I watched him call plays for you guys for a long time. He was driving me nuts every
Terrible.
time I was out there. All right, let's go over to the defensive side. So the defensive side, I mean, from just an overall perspective, they were a top 20 unit in points per game allowed. They're a top 20 unit in opponent yards per game. Like they did a pretty good job there. They got people off the field in third down. They were a top 25 unit in terms of that. But they were kind of middle of the pack in just rush defense and pass defense. They were a bend, don't break kind of defense. And when you watch that, I mean, from a sack percentage, that's really kind of where they went after. They were a top 10 unit getting after the quarterback. They did lose some guys there in that category, though. That's one of those things we're going to be talking about. But overall, they bring back a lot of pieces that didn't get a ton of usage out there. I mean, they brought in some transfers as well. They have a new coordinator, Kane Womack from South Alabama. He was the head coach. He's kind of bringing in a new system, 4-2-5-ish swarm defense over there. Not the 3-4. It's going to be kind of close, though, because him and Saban actually met, which is hilarious. They met and talked about best fit there. So kind of some changes going on the defensive side.
Yeah, for sure. They lost a ton. We'll talk about all of those guys, but there's also, you look along this roster and you're like, man, that kid's been a stud. Malachi Moore staying and kind of anchoring in, a veteran presence in that defense. He's up and down. I think last year was a bit of a mixed result type of year, but I also think that being on the back end of that defense is going to be pretty critical to this new secondary with a ton of new pieces.
Yeah.
Quindarius Robinson, I really liked him last year in the limited time that we saw him. I think he's one of those guys that could take a step forward. Deontay Lawson, they love him. The transfer corners, Damani Jackson, things don't always work out when you go out to USC. That's just how it goes, especially when you're a defensive player. But to me, this defense looks like it's going to certainly take a step backward, if only because of all the losses, but also be a good enough unit. And I think with this new scheme, they've got players that fit it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that speaks to Alabama's recruitment from the past, and getting these athletes, these versatile pieces. I think they're going to be in fine shape.
You got 5-star athletes. They fit in the puzzle.
Yeah.
Like you fit the puzzle
Well,
and you just make it work. I will say too, and Womack is a great coach. Like, Kane Womack has done a really good job at South Alabama. And he's going to be able to fit those pieces in there. Him just wanting to meet with Saban, talking about where players fit. I mean, that tells you everything you know as an Alabama fan. You're like, oh, this guy gets it. Now, the losses were a lot. So I put everybody on here. I know some are not as noticeable as others when you're talking about it. The one that really just grinds my gears. Do you know the one that does that? Caleb Downs, which I spelled wrong on purpose. You know why? Because you went to Ohio State, and I can't stand you. As a Michigan fan, you are crushing me. So, yes, I did that on purpose. In the comments, do not yell at me out there. 107 tackles, 2 interceptions, forced fumble. He was all over the place. He's a fantastic player. But definitely losing him is going to be a big loss there. Dallas Turner, Terrion Arnold, Kool-Aid McKinstry is one of those guys that, I thought he had a down year last year, and it's one of those things where, yeah, it's a loss. But obviously, if you go through the list, they did definitely lose some people there.
Yeah, I loved Chris Braswell last year. And
Mm-hmm.
Dallas Turner got all the buzz, but Braswell was just as good on the other side. Maybe not just as good. I think that's maybe overselling it, but there were times where it's like, man, was that Dallas Turner or was that the other guy? Oftentimes it was the other guy. Terrion Arnold obviously took a massive step forward. Kool-Aid probably a little down last year, but also still one of the better corners in the country, as it showed with his draft capital. So obviously lost a lot. They always do. They always find ways to replace it. I'm curious to see that path forward now with the new coach, if they're able to kind of continue building this defense the way Alabama defenses have been, or if we're transitioning to kind of this new era where Alabama offense is going to be carrying the
Mm-hmm.
defense a bit, kind of in the way that we saw LSU transition to that. I don't think they wanted to last year, but something similar where the offense is really kind of carrying the team to wins instead of the defense. We could see it, but it's still Alabama. I'm sure they'll still have all of these 5 stars coming in, as we're about to talk about.
They do. I mean, they did a great job when you're talking about just what they did there. Jim Mbakwe is a very, very solid cornerback, number 2 rated overall. When you're looking at Xavier Brown, cornerback, he was number 3 rated corner as well. Xavier Mincy, those 3 guys have been getting a ton of buzz. And I'm writing an article right now on Xavier Brown. They love this kid. Every single guy, the cornerback coach, the head coach, everybody, defensive coach, they're talking about how just mental preparedness, instincts, all of these things. I really think Xavier Brown is actually going to get the starting job over there. And I think he's going to kind of earn that starting role really early. The rotation is still out there. But if you haven't watched these guys play, especially Xavier Mincy, they're so much fun to watch those guys. Noah Carter, Jeremiah Beeman, they went really after this. The reason why they've done so well in the portal, why they're number 2 class, is because of the defensive side, the recruits that they brought in, and the caliber of guys. There's instant starters throughout this recruiting class where you're going to throw them in there and they're going to have kind of an impact this year, and maybe even a bigger impact than we think.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You look at the roster from a transfer perspective, you got guys that can play, but also I don't think this coaching staff is going to be afraid to throw some of these freshmen out there, especially if they're the better players. A new regime coming in, that tends to happen a little bit quicker. If you want to feel old, look at that name towards the bottom, Drake Kirkpatrick Jr. We're feeling it around here, but yeah, this class, to me, this is just a loaded class, and the fact that they were able to continue, pulling these guys in, keeping them committed, speaks to what recruits think of Kalen DeBoer and what this offense or what this defense can be.
Yeah, no, they did. And then they went out in the transfer portal, and I thought they did a good job. They filled a lot of pieces there. Damani Jackson, LT Overton, Keon Saab, King Mack. Really, Saab kills me because as a Michigan fan, it hurt watching him leave because he's a very, very solid safety out there. King Mack is also from Penn State. Very, very solid. I mean, they came in as two top 90 recruits in terms of the transfer portal rankings. Deshaun Jones, Cameron Howard. Like, obviously, they had a need. They went after the secondary, and they attacked that. But, LT Overton's another one. He was a five-star kid from Texas A&M. And if he can turn it on and figure it out, get the off field, gets kind of that stuff and get on the field, LT Overton could be a big kind of rotational piece for them on the line.
Yeah, I was actually going to talk about him the most here because when you look at that A&M team, you kind of realize they just put a ton of different personalities together. It didn't really work when they had all the five stars. They were throwing money at these guys. There's a chance that all of those guys are just incredibly talented, and it just wasn't going to work at A&M. Overton, from his high school film, at the very least, there are a lot of signs that he could be an impact player for them as early as this year. Obviously, we'll have to see him get on the field and remain in that rotation. But to me, that's the big get. And I think maybe one of the more critical transfers, if only because I think that that's where they could use a little bit more of a boost than even the secondary, which they hit pretty hard.
Yeah, they hit that hard, but then they got those pieces in the recruiting, and you're like, oh well, they are really deep back there. I mean, but they needed to. I think they lost the guys that they lost, and they're like, hey, let's do it now. Really, I put four guys on here, but as we said, there's so many rotational pieces. There's so many pieces to kind of figure out. I think you really could have put a lot of guys on this list. Damani Jackson, Tim Keenan III, Kadarius Robinson's a guy that you talked about. Jaheim Otis is another one. I thought Damani Jackson to me is one of those guys that really could step up. Last year, 32 tackles. He had 7 assisted tackles, but didn't have those interceptions, didn't have those like big play takeaways. Part of that was definitely just the defensive line's inability to create pressure and really just gave quarterbacks tons of time back there. I mean, it's one of those things, give and take there, the defensive line and the secondary there. So Damani to me is an interesting one kind of coming in there. Can he sure up? Can he hold off some of those talented freshmen and some of those other transfers there? So he's an interesting piece for me in that defensive secondary.
Yeah, I think the main question that I have for this defense is where they're going to find sack production, and Quindarius Robinson kind of showed that that could develop this year. I think with more playing time. He had a couple last year in limited playing time, and I think if you look at the openings of where they're going to need to find sacks between Turner and Braswell, they had over 20 sacks between the two of them. So they're going to need to get to the quarterback in some way. I think it's going to be more of a team-oriented approach than what they have in the past. But Robinson, to me, is the favorite to be that guy, to be that game wrecker, and kind of muddy up some pockets, which I think they will need with so many new bodies in that secondary. I think they're going to need some muddy pockets. I'm betting on Robinson to be that guy for them.
Yeah. All right. Let's look over here. Let's talk about the 2024 schedule. So over under is 9.5, which is a weird number. I have not seen that number for an Alabama team in a while. It's usually 10.5. That's usually what it is. Big games on the schedule. I think at Wisconsin is tricky. I think that tough. And then versus Georgia, one of those games where you got to go to Wisconsin, turn around and play Georgia. Could be a look ahead game. Could be one of those things. It's just tough. Wisconsin is a weird team this year. I'm not really sure who's quarterbacking at Wisconsin. So that's one of those things that could be kind of like the issue for them. At Tennessee is tough. At LSU versus Missouri, you get them home. At Oklahoma. And at an Auburn team, it's going to be a little spicy. I think Auburn really wants to they're killing on the recruiting trail, but they got to win on the field. So 9.5 is an interesting number, but I don't know. Where are you leaning with this number?
It's tough. You mentioned Wisconsin. I don't think Wisconsin knows quarterbacking Wisconsin at this point. So I think that could be the problem for them. And then going to Georgia right after, it's a classic look ahead where you go to Wisconsin. You might drop that one, and then things could get off the rails pretty quickly. At Tennessee versus Missouri at LSU is a brutal stretch there. And then to finish the season at Oklahoma and against Auburn and Iron Bowl, I think you're looking at this 9.5 and you're like, man, I don't know. Like I'm a little iffy on that, especially with all the changes that are happening. But when you look at the talent across the board, I am just gonna roll with the over. I think that they're gonna win 10 games. I think they're gonna sneak into the playoffs. A 10-win SEC team is for sure getting in. We know how the playoffs go. And then I think it could get a little dicey for other teams with Jalen Milroe at quarterback. By that point, I think he will have figured everything out. And so to me, this looks like a potential national title contender, like I mentioned earlier.
I'm I'm interested in this. I think that I'm on the over as well. I do think that Alabama has some games there, but you know what? They beat Georgia last year in the SEC title game. I think they got Carson Beck's gonna have to really step up in that game, and I do think that defensively they could do some things that kind of frustrate him. And I think if they get some takeaways early, that would be a big win for them. I love their odds right now to make the college football playoff. I think you're getting plus odds out there for them to make the college football playoff, and that is crazy to say for Alabama. And I think I just come back to this. I think Kalen DeBoer is one of the best coaches in college football. I watched him out here at Fresno State because I'm out here and I get season tickets. I saw what he was able to do at Washington. He's a smart coach. He knows how to coach guys. And it's one of those things too, like Saban was Saban. You're not going to ever replace Saban and what he is and what he meant for the program and everything like that. But getting DeBoer was smart because he's different, right? He's not the grinder guy. He's not going to get on your ass. He demands a lot, but he's also a player's coach. And Saban was, but in a different way. So, like, I do think that there can be I think it's going to be a good honeymoon for them. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, hey, play a little fresh. Hey, Monroe, you don't have to be as tight, right? Like, just go play your game. We got your back. We're here to you. And what he did with Michael Penix Jr. just kind of rings true to me. And I'm like, man, his development there was special. And if Monroe is special, Alabama can be special. And they're still Alabama. So give me that over the 9.5 there. Any final thoughts here on Alabama before we get out of here?
No, man, just an exciting team to watch. Right? They always are, but like especially this year because I think we're going to look at them with a more critical eye post Saban era. I think you're right though. I think DeBoer was the right hire. I think this could be another lifer for them, to be completely honest. With everything that we've seen thus far, maybe I'm a little overconfident in that, or maybe I'm just giving him too much credit for what's happened. But man, has he been just a fantastic
Yeah.
coach in college football. So this is going to be a fun team to watch. I hope Jalen Milroe is a first-round pick, as you mentioned. And if he is, that means that Alabama probably came close to winning a title. So I think Alabama fans want that as well.
If they get in, teams are not going to want to play this Alabama team. I'm going to tell you that right now. So that's where it's at. I think that they can win 3 games in the college football playoff. So appreciate you guys, Alabama fans. What do you think? Are you over or under the 9.5? What do you think that final outcome is going to look like? And how do you feel about DeBoer going into his first season? What are your expectations for him as a head coach? So appreciate you guys. We'll check you guys next time.